All right, we're now going to come to Fletcher College. Chad Hebert standing by. We're getting ready to do the Sheriff's Forum, the Chamber of Commerce, so we're going to kick it over to Chad right now.
Welcome to the Houma Terrebonne Chamber of Commerce's Terrebonne Parish Sheriff Forum. I'm Chad Hebert, owner of SafeWorks Safety Solutions, chairman of the board for the Houma Terrebonne Chamber of Commerce, and tonight's moderator. The purpose of the forum is to help our members in the community become better informed voters so they can make the best decisions this coming election. The Chamber is dedicated and committed to promoting, educating, and advocating for business prosperity and regional economic growth. Our mission is uniting community and building a stronger Terrebonne. The Chamber has taken every precaution possible to ensure that no one candidate was shown any favoritism or endorsement. Questions were submitted by Chamber board members, Chamber members, and members of the general public, and those questions were secured by the Chamber CEO, Ms. Nicole Blanchard, and our Executive Vice Chair of our Government Activities Division, Mr. Bill Erosh. No candidate, Chamber member, Chamber board member, member of the general public, nor myself have had access to any of the questions prior to tonight's forum. I'd like to introduce our guest panelists tonight. First, Ms. Jane Arnett, retired former Executive Director of South Central Industrial Association. Dr. Christine Strickland with Fletcher Technical Community College, and Mr. Bill Erosh with Watkins, Walker, Erosh, and Hoychek, Attorney at Law. Thank you for volunteering your time tonight. Now I'd like to introduce our candidates. Prior to introducing them, one candidate who was registered to be here tonight, Mr. Mark Petrie, has asked that we inform the viewing audience that he is unable to attend tonight due to being hospitalized for treatment of kidney stones. To the audience's far left, Ms. Jerry Smitko, Mr. Terry Dagg, Mr. Mike Swole, Mr. Tim Soignier, and Mr. Blaine Bergeron. Candidates, I'll give you each 2 minutes following this introduction to introduce yourself prior to the questions. Thank you for being here tonight. I'd like to go over the ground rules set for the candidates. Prior to seating, we drew numbers in the back to determine seating order and who will go first with the questions. Each candidate will get the same question and will have 2 minutes to respond to the questions asked by the panelists. I will give each candidate a signal through Mr. Bill Erosh when you have 30 seconds left in your time. You are to finish answering your questions. Should you not finish within your allotted 2 minutes, I will intervene so we can move on to the next candidate to answer the question or to the next question. I'm asking each candidate respect their opponent and allow them to answer the question without interruption within their 2 minutes. If a candidate does not follow the ground rules set, he or she will be given 2 warnings. A third violation will result in the candidate being removed from the forum. At the end of the forum, each candidate will have a designated time for closing comments. Candidates, do you have any questions? Ground rules for the viewing audience. We have a very large audience tonight. No verbal outbursts, heckling, or disrespecting of any candidate will be tolerated. No questions will be able to be taken from the audience tonight due to time constraints. There will be no warnings given to the audience. Any violation of the rules will result in security immediately removing an audience member from this forum. For introductions of the candidates, Ms. Jerry Smitko, would you please take 2 minutes to introduce yourself to the viewing audience?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I'd like to extend my appreciation to our esteemed panelists, to the Chamber of Commerce, their board of directors, and my fellow candidates who are here present for having this function. It is perhaps one of the most important things necessary for our democracy to function is that people not only vote, but make informed decisions when they vote. And this is an opportunity to allow the citizens of Terrebonne Parish to do that. And I certainly appreciate Mr. Falls and HTV for filming this so that all the citizens can benefit from it. For those of you that don't know me, I'm an attorney. I've been practicing law here in Terrebonne Parish for 33 years. I love Terrebonne Parish. This is my home. I've raised my child here. And backing up a little bit, I went to Nicholls State University, graduated magna cum laude with a degree in government, spent a year teaching school in Terrebonne Parish at Village East, teaching special ed because I had to make some money to go to law school. And with the money I saved, a partial scholarship, and way too much in student loans, I managed to commute every day to Tulane Law School and get my degree in 1986. I started, I have practiced, been in business, practiced criminal law, and I think I have the experience, the heart, the know-how, and the smarts.
Ms. Sitko, your time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Next, we'll move on to Mr. Terry Dagg. 2 minutes to introduce yourself to the general audience, please.
Hello, and I would first like to thank the Chamber and everyone else that participated in putting this forum on tonight. My name is Terry Dagg. I'm a resident of Terrebonne Parish. I was born and raised here. Left for a short period of time while I served our country in the U.S. Army and returned home afterwards. I've been employed at the Sheriff's Office for 23 years now, started right when I got home from the Army. I have a very diverse career within the Sheriff's Office. I started in corrections, then I moved to patrol, where I started working my way up the ranks. I got up to the rank of lieutenant and earned the title of shift commander as a patrol deputy. During that time, I also got on the Sheriff's Office SWAT team, along with the motorcycle squad, honor guard team, and assisted with water patrol. From there, I moved into the investigation division, spent most of my career as a detective where I investigated everything from theft to homicide. After that, I got promoted and put into the administrative part of the Sheriff's Office. I was the assistant to the uniform commander. It was kind of cool because I went back to supervising the roots of where I came from as a patrol deputy. After that, I moved to narcotics, and I was a narcotics commander for the next few years until mid-December of last year, when I was promoted to chief deputy and brought back into the courthouse. So I have a wide variety of experience, all in local law enforcement, all right here at Terrebonne Parish Sheriff's Office. I spent the last 23 years dedicated to the Sheriff's Office and the community of Terrebonne Parish. And I ask for your vote so that I can continue that dedication and continue serving our community. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Dagg. Mr. Mike Solé, please
Evening.
introduce yourself.
I would like to thank the Houma Terrebonne Chamber and Fletcher Community College for putting on this event tonight and inviting me to attend. My name is Mike Solé. I'm candidate for Terrebonne Parish Sheriff. I worked with the Terrebonne Parish Sheriff's Office for 38 years. I started my career in 1979 as a patrol motorcycle officer. I worked my way through the rank. I served as a detective, internal affairs investigator, SWAT team member, narcotics commander, chief of detectives, assistant to the sheriff, and also office administrator. I have a new vision for the Terrebonne Parish Sheriff's Office. I want to work in collaboration with all law enforcement agencies, government entities, and civic organizations. I also have a new direction I want to lead the Sheriff's Office in, which is fiscal responsibility, public service and safety, and also personnel and operations. I ask that you vote for me October 12th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Solé. Mr. Tim Soigné, please take your 2 minutes.
I'd like to thank the Chamber for holding this. I'd like to thank Fletcher Technical Community College. I'm 52 years old. I'm a product of the public school system at Terrebonne Parish. I graduated H.L. Bourgeois in 1984, 1985. I joined the Marine Corps. I spent 22 years in the Marine Corps, 14 years of which I was enlisted. I got commissioned as an officer in 1998. Upon completion of my retirement, 13 days after retirement, I joined Terrebonne Parish Sheriff's Office. I went to the police academy. I was a patrol deputy. I was a field training officer. Shortly after that, 2.5 years, I was moved to the training academy where I was an instructor at the police academy. At that point in time, I was also a SWAT member. In 2012, I was appointed as the director of the police academy. Also the SWAT commander at that point in time. From 2012 to 2018, I held those positions. In 2018, I was promoted to major, and I was a uniform patrol commander. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Soigné. Mr. Bergeron, would you please take your 2 minutes to introduce yourself?
Thank you also for having us here in this forum. My name is Blaine Bergeron. I'm a native of Terrebonne Parish. I was born and raised on Brooklyn Avenue in Houma. In '77, I graduated from high school at Vanderbilt Catholic. I began my law enforcement career in 1982 to through 1984 at the Terrebonne Parish Sheriff's Office. From there, I went to Nicholls State University, where I worked as a police officer while working on my degree. 1987, I earned a bachelor's degree in general studies at Nicholls. Also in 1987, I was lucky enough to be hired by the United States government as a special agent with the United States Customs Service. Primarily, I investigated drug smuggling and organized crime cases. In 2000, I was transferred to El Paso, Texas. In El Paso, I became a supervisory special agent of a drug group and a national security unit right after 9/11. I moved back to New Orleans as a national security unit supervisor in 2004. Now, at that time, shortly thereafter, I was placed in charge of the Special Response Team, which is the government's tactical team, Homeland Security's SWAT team. And Hurricane Katrina came around. Within days, I was part of the supervisory special agents that formulated the federal law enforcement response to the city of New Orleans, was instrumental in starting that. From there, after Katrina was over, we saw a need of a national team. I was one of the founders of the Rapid Response Team, which responds to every large incident in the United States. In 2009, I was promoted to resident agent in charge in Houma, Louisiana, and I came back home, and I ran investigations for Southeast Louisiana. I retired in 2016, and then I became security head at Loop, Louisiana Offshore Oil Port, which is the #1 critical infrastructure site in the state of Louisiana. I retired in March,
Mr.
and now I'm
Bergeron,
running for sheriff.
your time is up. Thank you. Okay, let's begin with our first question from our panelists. Our first question will be asked by Ms. Jane Arnett.
Good evening, candidates. First question for all of you will begin with Ms. Smitko, is what do you think should be your priority, your first priority, should you be elected Terrebonne Parish Sheriff, and what specific actions do you plan to address as your priority?
Thank you, Ms. Arnett. There is no doubt that the priority, the #1 priority for me as sheriff will be to get the financial house in order. I understand that tax revenues went down for a while, but you cannot talk about starting a new division, a new program, reinstating old programs until the department is on sound financial footing. And you can't wave a magic wand and necessarily have more ad valorem taxes coming in, but you can do certain things to increase the revenue. One, you can go after more grants, but the critical issue here is to evaluate each and every program, critically evaluate them, each and every division. You can't pay for everything, but you can look at what you have and evaluate it on a basis that you are sticking with the most cost-effective program that brings you the greatest results. So that's #1, get the financial house in order. I think the second part of that is to look at each and every employee that's there, because we have dedicated employees. And I hear talk of this candidate or that candidate bringing this one in or that one in or the other one in. You have to give the people who are there, who have dedicated their lives to law enforcement, you have to give them the benefit of the doubt. So you have to create, in essence, a personnel matrix and go through every person in the department.
Ms. Smitko, your time is up. Thank you. We need to move on to our next candidate. Mr. Terry Dagg, question to you.
So my number one priority will be the same priority I've had my entire career at the Sheriff's Office. I believe that my number one priority has always been and will remain to be crime prevention and solving crime. I believe that's where the sheriff should focus. I believe that's where our number one priority should be. There's several other things that the sheriff can get behind, different coalitions and help with different programs. But to dissect the question as far as the number one priority, it is to prevent crime and solve crime. Because of my very diverse career in different divisions, I see things maybe different than some people see them. Through my experience, I think I know where I want to go with the Sheriff's Office. I want to keep moving forward. We have been rebuilding a little bit as the economy comes up. I continue to do just that. And our budget is maxed out right now. There is not, as Ms. Mitko said, you can't wave the magic wand and bring in a bunch of more money. So it's not about adding this, or you can't just add all these things magically. You can start to focus on certain things. And it's not about adding a bunch of people, it's about reallocating the forces that we have. Okay, I believe that the Sheriff's Office is moving in the right direction. I've been dedicated to it for the last 23 years, and I'll remain doing the same thing. I plan on moving a few people around to beef up what I think should be done. No matter who wins this election, there'll be some change within the Sheriff's Office. No one man is going to run it, or woman, I'm sorry, will run it the same as any other. I know everybody within the Sheriff's Office. I know their strengths, I know their weaknesses, and I know where they can best serve the public, and that's what I plan on doing.
Thank you, Mr. Dagg. Mr. Soule?
Realistically, we all do have to look at the budget. I plan on studying the budget, or the expenditures and the budget as well. I'm a grant writer. I've written grants, so I do plan on researching for grants and writing for grants that's going to help even out the budget. We also have to redo the pay scale to attract good people and to keep the good people that are already there. I do plan on promoting from within, so that's about it.
Thank you, Mr. Soule. Mr. Soignier?
Well, first thing, we do have to get a grip of the finances within that office. But we have to get out there and look what the taxpayers and what the people are expecting out there for Terrebonne Parish. I can tell you the north end of the parish, they want more patrol officers. The south end of the parish, they want water patrol. So, you know, we have to, and what we're dealing with is a lot of property crimes, the drugs. There's a lot of deeper issues in Terrebonne Parish. And once we get the allocation of funds, we can figure out the budget, get everything in line. We have to start providing these services to Terrebonne Parish. Drugs are out of control. I'm hearing it every single day, but bringing valid solutions to some of these problems. And we have to address those problems as a community. And as the most important thing, we have to work together as a community. All of these issues, which we have to deal with, these are some of the most important things to the people of Terrebonne Parish. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Soignier. Mr. Bergeron, your 2 minutes.
Right now, our community is in a crisis. We're having people that are overdosing on opiates, fentanyl-laced drugs, killing them. There's been a lot of deaths. You're not hearing a lot about it in the paper, but there are a lot of overdose deaths. What are we going to do different? This is a crisis. We need to move now. We can't wait till tomorrow. We're going to, of course, continue the enforcement that is occurring with street crimes units and long-term investigation, but we want to get into partnerships with other agencies and work hand in hand. Currently, a lot of agencies are only selectively working with the Sheriff's Office on selective issues. We need to bring the federal government agencies who want to work with them, the state police and other state agencies, the Houma Police Department, to work hand in hand daily on these issues. Getting into the drug problem is not one silver bullet that's going to take care of it. There's not one thing that can stop this issue. One thing we have to do is get back into the schools, get back with the DARE program, decision making, teaching kids how to make decisions, correct decisions, because right now they're making the wrong decisions and then they're getting hooked on these narcotics and it's killing people. So we have to attack that and start laying groundwork now, putting seeds with our children to stop. And you won't see anything for 4 or 5 years, but you might see a reduction in crime because everything is stemming from our drug problem right now. That's the #1 priority that I want to bring my expertise to to try to stop it and turn this. This is a big ship. You're not going to turn it immediately. It's going to be by slowly movements. But working with the community, getting our community leaders working hand in hand, coming up with solutions, and we all pulling the rope in the same direction instead of everybody doing their own thing. We have to get together to get this problem solved, and we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Our next question will start with Mr. Dagg.
Good evening, candidates. The question is, what are your specific plans to address the growing epidemic of heroin and opioids within our youth and our general population?
So, as I said earlier, I did spend the last few years running our narcotics division. I believe we have a top-notch narcotics division in Terrebonne Parish. We do work hand in hand with the Houma City Police Department Narcotics Division, Louisiana State Police Narcotics Division, along with DEA and other state and federal organizations. We do have an epidemic, but that epidemic is not a Houma thing. It's not a Terrebonne Parish thing. This is not a Louisiana thing. This is a nationwide issue that we're suffering from. Okay. We have 2 of our agents that are currently tasked out to DEA because these investigations leave our jurisdiction quickly. We have been successful in the last few years in tracking these cases all the way back down to South Texas and across the border into Mexico. These cases do take time. It's not an overnight thing. Some people may have seen a recent press release done. That investigation took 2 years, but that had a large impact on our community. We are making ground. We're going to continue to make ground. When it comes to I don't like to just talk about the opioid epidemic because we have more problems than just opioids. It is one of the worst things out there. In 2017, we had 53 overdoses deaths in Terrebonne Parish alone. 53 people in Terrebonne Parish died confirmed of an overdose. In 2018, that number went down to 33. So we are gaining some ground. We have about 13 so far this year. That's done through narcotics investigations that are taking not just the corner level dealers off the street, but the people trafficking it in, your major dealers off the street, along with other programs that we're in. To educate the school, we do a PowerPoint presentation within the high schools now, and we have all of our first responders equipped with medications to help reverse these effects when they come across it. Without a doubt, the narcotics is our biggest problem here. I have been and will continue to focus on that.
Thank you, Mr. Dagg. Mr. Soule?
Question again?
Certainly. What are your specific plans to address the growing epidemic of heroin and opioid use with our youth and the general population?
First, I'd like to say that I will bring the DARE program back. It's a grant-funded operation, and I will be bringing that back as well. Now, I spent 13 years in narcotics, and you have to change with the trends. When I first started narcotic, the drug of choice on the street was crack cocaine. It went from there to the ecstasy and the date rape drugs to the Rohypnol and everything. So as a narcotics commander, we kept abreast with all the changing trends of drugs. And you have to be able to change with everything. The narcotics division that I held or handled, they were dedicated, hardworking individuals. We took thousands or millions of drugs off the street, along with thousands of drug dealers off the street. The kids have to understand the dangers of these drugs, and we were out there doing it. We had drug talks with the kids in the schools, and the DARE program was already in place back then. And once you take that away, the Rohypnol, or the opioid epidemic right now, yes, in 2017 we had 53 deaths, and it reduced in 2018. I don't think it was solely because of the investigations. Narcan came up, so it reduced quite a bit as far as that's concerned. I'm good.
Thank you, Mr. Soule. Mr. Soigné, question?
All right. First thing, trying to conquer this opioid issue, we have to understand the addiction on what it's actually causing. If you understand the addiction, we have to continue working with other law enforcement agencies. We have to continue hitting those streets. But I'm going to tell you, the drug houses are like ant beds. You can spray one, but they got two of them right down the street. But that's not the total answer. What we got to do is start conquering the addiction and understand the addiction. Once these guys are incarcerated, they're sitting there for 6 months, nothing's happening. Now, of course, we have to educate our children, so we're trying to break a cycle on what's been going on, such as DARE and all these programs, so they have enough self-esteem to know that they can say no. But getting back to the fact, they're sitting there for 6 months, 8 months, most of them committing property crimes. About 80, 90% of what we have incarcerated are addicts, and they're sitting there and nothing's happening. I will open up faith-based organizations and allow them in there to start doing something with them, because it's a lot better than what we've been doing. But that's one thing different that I will do. I will open up those doors. And there's other things I have planned for that can be self-funded, that we can actually fund for long-term help. But we have to bridge those gaps between counseling. We have to bridge those gaps, because when they're sitting there for 6 months, they're not conditioned for help. Either one, they can become a better criminal, or two, they just don't know how to get the help or where to get it. But we have to open up those doors and put that in there so they understand this is a better option for you. And for the next, while they're there for 6 months, I plan on instilling them the better options. There are faith-based organizations that are self-funded, so it's not a burden on the taxpayer. There are resources out there. We have to open our doors to open up to the law enforcement, that we can help our community out. Because the reality of it is 6 to 8 months, they're going right back out. And if we don't do nothing with them, shame on us. So we do have to address that issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Soignier. Mr. Bergeron, question to you.
Well, I think I answered a bit of it, but I'll expand on my first answer, what I thought was the number one problem, which is the drug epidemic. When I speak of the different agencies, there's also mental health. There's many agencies that are all doing a little bit of everything, but nobody's really working together on solutions. If you look at the Lafourche Parish jail, it's not a jail anymore, it's a correctional facility. They're trying to rehabilitate those that are eligible and look like they are candidates to be rehabilitated. I would venture to guess that every person here is either affected by drugs with their family, their friends, their neighbors, or their co-workers in some way, shape, or form with the epidemic we have going on. I think that's safe to say. Even in TV land, you have the same thing. Everyone has some effect. My own family has it. Everyone has it. So what are we doing that's different? If we do the same thing over and over, just putting people in jail, and don't get me wrong on this, there's people that are evil. They need to be in jail. They will go to jail. But then there's also people that make one mistake. It should not define them for the rest of their life. And we're trying to find a way to get them back into society. And that's working with faith-based community involvement, and really working to work together instead of separate groups. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Next question from Mr. Erosh. Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies.
That's okay.
My apologies.
You will never, ever be able to arrest your way out of the drug problem. It won't happen. When our folks in Baton Rouge came together in a bipartisan effort, more Republicans than Democrats, and pushed through the 2017 criminal justice reforms, they recognized that. They looked at the empirical data that told them that within 5 years, you let someone out of prison who's doing their DOC time today, within 5 years, 46% of those folks are going to be right back in prison. You can't win like that. We will never be able to stem the tide. Diversion programs are the key. There is not one sober living house in Terrebonne Parish. There are probably 50, and I'm guessing it's probably more than that in Lafayette, more than that in Baton Rouge. We do need to work together, faith-based, non-faith-based, governmental, we need to work together to put the resources there, because addicts, if we can put them on the right path, that's one less person, one less customer for the drug dealer. So I am a firm believer that we need to triage right away. We have so many people sitting in our jail and in every jail, it's a high percentage, that have mental illness. We have a much higher percentage that are drug addicts. We need to triage them, get them the help they need. But
Ms.
they're
Smitko, your time is up. Thank you very much. 2 minutes goes quick. 2 minutes goes quick. Look, just watch. There's a signal right here. Just watch. Okay, next question.
The next question to the candidates. If you were elected sheriff of Terrebonne Parish, what actions would you take to improve recruiting, hiring, and retention of deputies? And please be specific.
Mr. Solé, this
first
is your...
goes to Mr. Solé.
As we spoke about the budget earlier, that is the main thing that's going to attract and keep good employees. I will research and look over the budget, and I will make it across the board to where it will be fair for everybody that's going to be getting paid through the sheriff's office. It will help attract good employees. It will help keep good employees. I will promote from within. There are good, like Ms. Smitko said earlier, there are good employees in there. Some of them are being looked over. They need to know their worth, and I will make sure that they do know their worth. I try not to say that I will go after a tax, because that's the last thing I want to impose on the public. I do believe that the sheriff's office has a working budget, but you just have to put the money at the right place.
Thank you, Mr. Solé. Mr. Soignier?
Question, please.
If elected sheriff of Terrebonne Parish, what actions would you take to improve recruiting, hiring, and retention of deputies? And please be specific.
Okay, first thing, recruiting. The issues with recruiting, there's excellent retirement benefits for the sheriff's office. And upon getting hired, when I looked at the actual benefits, there's not a lot of promotional of the benefits or even explaining to our young police officers. I did it during an academy setting, but more importantly, understand, a lot of these officers, when they don't understand their finances, they want to bounce, maybe go work offshore, whatever the case may be. But really, there's an excellent retirement program that is available. So first thing is explaining a retirement system, explaining the fact that it is actually worthwhile doing a job. I don't know a single police officer that does it for the money. Now, retaining police officers, it goes back to the actually environment. A police officer is an A-type personality. Once you train in these officers, it's A-type. The environment at office needs to be fostered to where they can actually excel and do that particular job. Most officers do not like to be reactive, they like to be proactive. But more importantly, creating that environment to where they actually get to finish what they started. A lot of officers today which experience in burnout, they are working shorthanded. We're working through deficits and trying to work through all of these other issues. But most of these officers out there today, they're writing complaints and they're sending them up. And it's amazing while the Bureau is being overworked because they got stacks and stacks of cases. So the environment is like if all they're doing is completing complaints, and that's all they're doing is writing them up, they don't really feel a sense of satisfaction. I think creating an environment that's going to foster that where they feel like they've done something at the end of the day. And most of those guys have. They do it day in and day out, but they do experience a lot of burnout. And we have to take a look at that and make sure we're fostering an environment where those officers can excel and know they do a good job, because they do a good job. They get out there doing that job day in and day out. And they deserve a heck of a lot more than what they're getting.
Your time is up. Thank you. Mr. Bergeron, question to you.
Well, the way I'm going to answer this might be a little different. It all comes down to your leadership. A person told me the other day that in a department they were pushing for a raise, $2,000 raise. Everybody will be happy if there's $2,000. They got their $2,000, they weren't happy. Why weren't they happy? It was not a happy environment. They weren't glad to come to work. Their leadership did not provide that. Now, when I talk about leadership Leadership looks like a pyramid. The boss is there, and then it goes down, right? My brand of leadership is turned upside down. It's called servant leadership. Once an employee knows that you are working for them, you're spending your time with their best interests in hand. You're doing everything for them. You're the boss, but you're there to support them, to guide them, to train them, to get them the assets they need, to teach them and keep them in the white lines of how to do things. Those employees will work harder than you can believe. I learned this by accident when I was 15 years old, working at G.G. Marcel's Firestone, busting tires. The owner and manager was Michael Marcel. Mike Marcel worked harder than anyone in that store. He helped you. He didn't care. He was the owner. If he needed to help you bust a tire, he would do it. He would do what no one else would do. He worked for you. And from that, you work 10 times harder. People will stay in a job when they enjoy it and they know their boss is with them. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Ms. Smitko, a question to you.
Real quick, on that last question, I'm going to use a little bit of my time. Two things with the diversion. One, if you have made a decision to make a living selling drugs in this parish, the only place you're going to get diverted to is a state prison cell. And if you're an addict that doesn't want help, you'll be there too. Now, in terms of recruiting and retention, there's something that has been lacking in the sheriff's office and in most parts of parish government for a long time, or has never existed. It's called procedural justice. Everybody needs to know that they're being treated fairly. They have to be treated fairly. You can be a great leader, but if the folks in the department aren't being treated fairly, they're not going to want to stay. It's not about retirement when you're 26 years old and you have 2 little ones and a wife. It's about your pay scale. That's important, and that needs to be adjusted. There's some folks who are making way too much money and doing nothing, but the critical factor is lay it out. This is what's expected of you, and everyone in that department will be treated fairly. No more, you're getting promoted because you're so-and-so's friend, or you're not getting promoted because you bucked that one. Fairness within the department. And I also think that educational opportunities in cooperation with Fletcher and their criminal justice program to make it work within a police officer's schedule would be amazing, because it gives them a chance to get ahead, and it brings those new ideas, which are sorely lacking here in Terrebonne Parish, new ideas about law enforcement into the department.
Ms. Smitko, your time is up. Thank you for your response. Mr. Degg?
So I believe the first part of the question was about recruiting. I believe that recruiting has to be done just like any other career. You can recruit through high schools, through job fairs, through colleges such as Fletcher, through your human resources division, going out to these things and recruiting these people, putting the facts out there as far as what you do, what the pay scale is, and what the benefits are towards it. Recruiting is very important. That's where you get the influx of people to start. As far as the retention of it goes, I will institute a board of people that will participate in this. I will have a board of people that will, all of the transfers, promotions, demotions, and all of that will go through. It will not be a one-man's opinion. It will not be up to me as the sheriff. I'll have some input on it, but there'll be a board of senior members of the sheriff's office that will make these decisions when people get transferred, when people get promotions. A lot of times, you promote someone who you look at, they would be great at this job, and there may be someone else that you didn't even know was interested, that if you would have known that, that would have made the best choice. So we will actually have openings. We'll post job openings, position openings within the department for transfers or promotions to go towards. This board will interview these people and make these decisions. Another thing they'll do is exit interviews. I think it's important to do exit interviews. Law enforcement has a high turnover rate, and I don't know that you can totally stop that, but you have to try and retain your middle management people. That's where all your experience comes from, your knowledge, and they still have the work drive to get everything done. When you start losing those people, I believe that you have to do exit interviews. You start figuring out if you're losing 10 people over a few-month period, why you're losing them. Interview these people, find out what the problem is. If they're all leaving because the oil field's booming and they're going to make money, that's one thing. But I believe you can tweak the department and make it a more friendly work environment.
Thank you. Next question will go to Mr. Tim Soignier.
The bottom line is that there's going to be a new sheriff in town. And what, right now, in this particular question, we'd like for each one of you to get very specific and tell us and talk to us about your plan to address fiscal responsibility and the fact that the Sheriff's Department has had to borrow money in the past. So now let's see what you're going to do.
All right, like first thing, we do have to get a hold of the finances. But at the same time, we need to prioritize the services which we provide to Terrebonne Parish. First thing being law enforcement. Now, we do have to prioritize, but the most important thing is the physical responsibility, is the money. Money don't come out of the air, and they don't have trees to grow on. So the fact is, once we get a grip of the finances and we can prioritize every single thing which we need to do from the law enforcement side to the civil side and to the correctional side. So the answer to the question is we do have to get a grip of that budget, and we do have to, in fact, prioritize on the services in which we provide our community. And number one being our law enforcement, because when they want a police officer, when people call, they want a police officer to show up not 2 hours later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Soignier. Mr. Bergeron?
Repeat the question, please.
Oh, sure. In the past, the parish has had to borrow, the Sheriff's Department has had to borrow money to meet the fiscal responsibility. What are you specifically going to do to make this right and your fiscal responsibility direction?
Well, everybody here has to balance their own budget at the house. You have to live within your means. If you don't, you're going to have problems. Obviously, that's happened. I'm not an accountant, and I don't handle too many budgets. I handled one for Lou for $1 million, and this is just 26 times that. But I'll tell you this, we had accountants look at the audits of the sheriff's office, and the problem they saw was there's no specific amount spent by each department. So it's kind of taken out of a general fund. You don't know where really the money's going or where it's coming from. So we have to be able to get into it and get into the weeds on these kind of things with audits to tell us where the money's being spent. Is it being overspent by some department? Is it something we can move? Can we reallocate the funds? But we have to live within our budget. As far as taxation, for more money, taxation, we can't tax ourselves into prosperity. We got a down economy. Things are starting to pick up. So as things pick up, I think it'll look better for the budget for the sheriff's office. But as far as making a tax burden on the people that have lost jobs, that have lost their income, we can't do that. We can't go for more taxes. We have to live within our means, providing the services that we are supposed to provide, which is to protect and serve the citizens of Terrebonne Parish. And, of course, tax collection. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Ms. Smitko?
I touched on that earlier because I said that's the most important thing. You have to start there. You have to get the house in order. And a lot of the answers or basically seeing the sheriff's office as law enforcement. Keep in mind, it's law enforcement, tax collection, revenue sharing, seizures and sales, running 2 jails, making sure we're ready for emergency response, courthouse security, water patrol. There are so many facets of the sheriff's office other than just going out and catching criminals. It's a big office. It has a lot of responsibilities that are constitutionally mandated. And what I said before, we have to look at every division every department critically. I spent 12 years with an organization appointed to deal with a budget with an organization whose assets were over $300 million, whose revenues were $160 million a year. I was appointed to be the chair of the Louisiana Indigent Defender System, the budget for the entire state. I'm not a CPA, but I can look at the audit reports that have been sent in to the legislative auditor and realize it's a problem when your CPA says one of the big problems here is they do a budget at the beginning of the year and they never look at it again. There are no budget review meetings, not monthly, not weekly, not semi-annually. All of those departments, it's not just law enforcement, all those departments need to be looked at, and grants. If you look at it, there's a saying, there's an app for that, and now in law enforcement, there's an app for that. But the other thing is, there's a grant for that. And we certainly aren't taking advantage
Ms. Mitko, your time is up.
of the grants out there. Thank you.
Mr. Dagg, question to you.
I think our proposed budget for this year is about $27 million. It's been over 30-some years. It's been lower than where we're at this year. About 65% of that budget comes from taxes, comes from property tax and sales tax. And about 65% of that budget goes towards your employees. That is the salary and benefit package of it. So it leaves you about 45% to play with, or about 35% to play with, sorry. The problem with it is we have a very diverse community in Terrebonne Parish. When you look from the north end of the parish all the way to the south end of the parish and think about how diverse our community is and different types of people, I believe that all those people should have a voice in where those tax dollars are spent. It shouldn't be spent the way I think it needs to be spent every time. So you have so much that you have to allocate towards your employees. And right now we're at about 250 people. Most of my career, we've been at about 300, maybe slightly over 300. I've seen our department be as high as almost 400 people. That has to fluctuate with the economy. It has to fluctuate with our budget and what it can support. The remaining of that money, there is some that comes in grants, but you can't put grants as part of your annual budget. I've been over the grant division of the Sheriff's Office for the last few years, and there's grants that are different every year. You can't build something based off of a grant because you may not receive that grant next year. It's different every year. So you have to be able to operate within that budget, and you have to give the people a voice in that budget, and I will. And I won't appoint that board. I will reach out to different civic groups and have them appointed. This won't be me and 10 of my buddies going to lunch and then me go back and say, this is what we decided to spend the money on. Everybody in every different culture within our parish will have a voice on where our tax dollars are spent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dagg. Mr. Soley, question to you.
Checks and balances is the answer to this thing. You can't run a budget and just have a spending problem and expect that you're going to end up with a plus. The thing about it is I plan on realigning the budget as to where it's going to be putting each division on a budget. They're going to be checks and balances. They're going to be there's going to be equipment, training, and overtime that's going to be allotted for each division. And I will keep good track on that, make sure that they don't overspend. I think the Sheriff's Office has a spending problem at this point. There's agencies that should have came up to the table, and not until the programs were cut, that's when all of a sudden they stepped up to the table and said there was finances to be able to fund some of the programs that were cut. So they stepped up. So I will make sure that these agencies or entities will step up and have their fair share in the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question, please.
Our next question first goes to Mr. Bergeron. What is your position on housing local prisoners versus housing state prisoners, considering the costs versus the advantages of housing such prisoners?
Housing state prisoners versus local prisoners, that's what you're asking me? I know the Sheriff's Office has gotten an increase in the state prisoners, the amount that they're receiving, but the jail shouldn't be a business. Shouldn't be a business. We're handling local prisoners, and they're only here until they go into the state system. So, which, I'm not really sure what you're looking at, but we're not using the jail as a moneymaker. It's doing what we have to do. When we have state prisoners, we have to keep them till the state has space for them. So, that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Ms. Mitko, question to you.
Well, I'm going to totally disagree on that, because when we talked about the budget problem, there's ad valorem taxes, sheriffs get sales taxes, and, you know, I understand you can't say, I'm going to make grant funding this part of my budget. You can't. But if I can get a grant for $1 million for this kind of training, or $1 million worth of grants, and part of it's for certain types of training, I don't have to pay for that. So that money that I've allocated for training goes back into my general fund. In terms of state prisoners versus local prisoners, the sheriff can make money. The sheriff can enter into contracts to make money. There are a multitude of ways that sheriffs enter into contracts and make money. If you have enough space in your jail to set up the diversion programs and the triage units that you want to set up, and you have extra space, and you evaluate what is the state paying me versus what does it cost me, what is my overhead, and turns out you're making money on a state prisoner, the more money you make that goes into your general fund, the more money you have to provide services to the people of the parish. So I believe that when the opportunity presents itself, the sheriff should certainly enter into contracts, all contracts pursuant to bid law and pursuant to RFPs. But if you can make money and supplement what you're getting from the state revenue sharing, from taxes, licenses, bond forfeitures, etc., then you need to do it, because you're doing it to provide funds, to provide services for y'all.
Thank you, Ms. Mitko. Mr. Dagg?
I couldn't agree with Ms. Mitko more than by her saying that we should be entering into contracts to make money. The more money that the sheriff's office can make and provide more things for the general public, the less of your tax dollars that have to be spent on it. The state, housing our state inmates, and maybe there's a misconception of how many we house in there, our state inmates does bring in some money. But you have to know that that money is not exclusively to the sheriff's office. That money is split between the sheriff's office and the parish government. This year, the revenue made from state inmates is only going to cover about 6.5% of our budget. So it is substantial enough to think about, but it's not anything that's one of your top priorities in your budget. You know, the sheriff by statute is responsible for the jail and the booking of inmates. There's nothing that says how many inmates the sheriff has to hold or how many facilities he has to run. Okay, so that was one of the big issues that came about recently as far as shipping inmates to other parishes versus housing them. You have to keep enough room within your facility to house the inmates that are awaiting trial. Okay, but you don't need misdemeanor law violators and nonviolent criminals clogging up that facility. I believe that you can house enough state inmates to help defer the cost of running the jail and help defer the cost of the staff it takes for the jail. And that's what you should focus on, is equalizing that. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dagg. Mr. Solé, question to you.
I do plan on housing state inmates, but I will not lose focus on these public safety. I'm not going to house enough inmates to where you won't be able to put the dangerous people in jail. So I'm not going to be about a money thing. I do take advantage of it, but I'm not going to lose the focus on public safety. I will have enough room to put people that belongs in jail locally that's going to be there, and that's it.
That's it. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Solé. Mr. Soigné, question to you.
I think currently they're housing roughly about 250. I think the sheriff's office cut it out as about $13 per inmate, which equals about $1.7 million a year. So we do have to have a happy balance. We have to take care of our, we have to take care of locals, but more importantly, we're actually sitting on an opportunity, especially with the facility right next door to the juvenile, which became a women's facility. Transitional work program, taking care of our people in Terrebonne Parish, is the direction. If we're going to conquer the drug problems, if we're going to conquer all of these issues we have within our community, here's an opportunity we can actually start rehabilitating and working these people back into society, where now they become taxpayers instead of a burden on a taxpayer. And we can concentrate on more the people or the inmates that are from Terrebonne Parish, and we're sitting on a perfect opportunity. Look, there's a lot of legwork been involved. I'm starting on manuals and programs that we can actually, realistic programs, so we can start solving these issues. People can look at a jail as a nuisance, but I'm looking at it as an opportunity to start solving a lot of our problems we have in society, because it is an opportunity. Now, it's not the caveat, it does make a little bit of money, but the important part, we start working on the rehabilitating, so we're reducing the recidivism, and we're reducing all these things which we're having in our community. These guys are getting out 6, 8 months, they're going right back. There's a problem. There's a problem when a correctional officer says, you know, we'll probably see in about 6 months. And there's a problem when there's property crime out there and the police officer is wondering if such and such got out of jail. We have to take care of our community, and we have to instill programs that pretty much fund themselves, that we can actually do good for our community. Because it's a shame if we just release them and let them out, and that's the definition, like he said, the definition of insanity, doing the same thing expecting a different result. We have to do something different.
Thank you, Mr. Soigné. Your time is up. Next question, we'll start back up with Ms. Smitko.
Next question for the candidates. During the last month or so, there have been multiple mass shootings in the United States. What specific protocols would you put in place to address any type of mass shooting in Terrebonne Parish?
Mr. Erosh, thank you for that question. I think there has been active shooter training in the schools. The Department of Justice, Attorney General Barr, puts out a specific list of what municipalities or parishes should do to prepare for an active shooter or a mass shooting. The problem I see is that it's a perception versus reality problem. When you have 44,000 plus people a year dying from gun violence because they committed suicide with a gun, and 22-something thousand people a year in the United States dying from gun violence because it was what we know as gun violence, someone shot someone else, and less than 200 people a year dying as a result of a mass shooting, we have a perception and a reality problem. Yes, we need to be prepared. Do I think we need to go into elementary schools and have active shooter training? Absolutely not. 30-something% of our high school children are saying now that they are extremely worried that they will be the victim of a mass shooting. Think about it. 44,000 people are committing suicide with a gun. 20-something thousand are dying because of regular gun violence, maybe 200 in mass shootings. Reality. The reality is what we have to deal with. So I think that we follow
Ms. Smitko, thank
the
you.
Attorney
Your time
General's
is up.
recommendation.
Thank you. Mr. Day, question to you.
So mass shootings or active shooter, what we refer to as homicide in progress, obviously is a huge topic nationwide. I've been an active shooter instructor for over 15 years. I've been to 2 of these instructor level courses to come back and train within. Law enforcement trains for this across the board nationwide the same. We all train the exact same, and it should remain that way because we have to be able to interact with each other. When something like this tragedy would occur, you never know what agencies are going to show up, and we all have to work together. So the answer is to continue training, and training. Also, we need to get back to the ground level of our patrol officers and their response and how they react to these things. When I was a young patrol deputy, we went to every school in the parish. That's what we did. When you wasn't on a complaint and you were working during the day when school was open, you went to the schools within your beat, within your patrol zone, and you got out and you walked through these schools. It serves more than one purpose walking through these schools. One, from the tactical standpoint, you learn the school, you learn the design of it, you learn the hallways and the corners and everything you need to know tactically as a police officer. But what it does more than that is the officer presence within the school. When kids, staff, whoever sees the marked units parked outside, they see the uniformed deputies walking through the hallway, it deters crime. We have to get back to those things and doing those things. Obviously, there's some issues with manpower and do you have time for that? But we have to prioritize how we're going to spend our time when these deputies aren't on complaints. And any tactical team member will be required to tour every school within the parish.
Thank you, Mr. Degg. Mr. Soy, question to you.
After Columbine and the shootings to follow, I saw a need for active shooter training. I asked the sheriff about it, and myself and Mr. Saunier collaborated together to put on a program. And being that he was in training, he went ahead and did so. We, on a regular basis, every year after school was let out, they'd have active shooter training with the teachers, and then it eventually involved first responders and all that stuff. Recently, I came across where it looked like there was a disconnect, where fire department was doing their own training, police department was training sometimes with our department, but I want a unified active shooter training to where all agencies, state police, Houma Police Department, Terrebonne General, Ochsner's, Chabert, all these agencies has to come together and work together because that's where it's going to happen and everybody needs to work on the same page. I want to mimic a program that St. Charles has. It's called Eat on the Beat. And the schools that don't have SROs in it, these officers stop by and have lunch. And that serves another purpose, whether, just being friends with the kids and everything, but also a security issue as well that's going to kind of cover that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Soy. Mr. Soignier, question to you.
Okay, breaking down schools, I think the important part, we can't have our head in the sand thinking it's not going to happen in our own backyard. So we do have to be prepared. But the first line of defense is often in most schools is not the police officer. It's actually the teacher. And this is why we started this training, is letting the teachers know their first response, but more importantly, learning about physical security of their schools. Basically, making sure doors are locked, making sure some of the simple things that create that delayed process for law enforcement response. We don't have SROs in every school, but I can tell you if we did, it would cost about $3.5 million to do it. Now, realistically, it's kind of that's pretty expensive. Is it worth it? Absolutely, it's worth it. But we can't filter the money out of the air. So there are other options. Options I can propose. One is a volunteer system. We can have a volunteer system of retired parents, teachers that may have retired where they can actually go into schools and just, for lack of better terms, be hall monitor, checking physical security things, and it can be an early warning device. Cameras are a feel-good. They're only effective if somebody's watching them. And we spend a lot of money on cameras, but the reality of it is we got volunteers. They had the school safety coalition, and they were, every time there's a school shooting something, they come together and they ask questions, what can we do? What can we do? Well, teachers can act, parents, retirees are willing to volunteer. I'm not talking about arming them. I'm talking about just making them hall monitors. Simple watches, early warning devices that can allow a delay so police officers can actually respond. But it extends beyond that. This is about mental preparation. It does happen in workplaces. It's happened in churches. And I can tell you over the last 6 months since I've resigned to actually run for sheriff, I've actually gone in 2 or 3 churches and actually gave them some of the lessons
Mr.
as far as how to
your time is
do
up.
this.
Moving on to the next candidate, Mr. Bergeron, question to you.
Well, the question was about mass shootings. The problem with mass shootings, the sheriff's office already does active shooter training in the schools. And I'm sure they've done threat analysis of all the schools and the churches in our area. But these mass shootings are occurring other places. Sometimes it could be a mall, sometimes it could be a festival. Recently it was festivals and it's different locations. How do you stop something like this? Now, the Sheriff's Office, Police Department, State Police, they're all trained on what the actual tactical response is. But how do we get before it happens? And that's what I want to focus on, intelligence-based policing. There are apps out there, and let me just explain what it was explained to me. After the Boston bombing, the FBI went up on several hundred lines. They didn't receive any phone calls. They didn't understand what was going on. Tips on the Boston bombing. Nothing was happening. When they looked at their email, they had over 1,000 emails with tips. People are more likely to report something on those phones than they are to pick up the phone and call. It's just, things have changed. They're different than when we were young kids. The technology exists, these apps exist where someone can send information, suspected information. This is about see something, say something. Mental illness is a big deal and no one's reporting it. So we're going to try to come up with this intelligence-based policing where we can get this information and look into if we have a threat that we don't know about. A lot of people just don't report it. We're going to encourage them through this app to start reporting things. And maybe we can get there before it happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Next question, we'll start with Mr. Dagg.
Mr. Dagg, is this on? Okay. Terrebonne Parish is a huge parish, and you're dealing with not just land, you're dealing with water and the drug trafficking via the boats, drugs coming in and things like that. And you have the northern part of the parish, you have the central part of the parish. How are you going to address the lack of deputies to man all of these areas?
As I was saying earlier, our budget is pretty much maxed out. You can't come into the sheriff's office right now and hire an additional 50 people. It's not going to happen. It's not supported. If someone says they can do that and they can't tell you what they're going to cut, then you need to question that. So I do have a concept of how to put a few more in patrol. We've actually put a few more in patrol recently. We've added a few members to our uniform patrol division within the last couple of months. If the economy keeps building and the money keeps rising, that is one of the focuses and where we'll continue to go. Uniform patrol division is one of the most valuable parts of the sheriff's office. It is your first line of defense as a citizen in Terrebonne Parish. That's who you're looking for. When people are in a crisis and they're scared and they're waiting for a deputy to show up, they're not envisioning the plainclothes cop, the detective, or the narcotics agent. They're looking for that blue uniform. That's the first line of defense. That's who they want. They're very important. We have added some, and as the economy continues to rise, we'll add some more. There is maybe a little bit of a way to reallocate some forces to it as well. But also, I have a concept of maybe slightly redesigning the patrol zones of the sheriff's office and changing those boundaries of where these deputies work. And I believe that although that doesn't add numbers, it has a possibility of cutting down the response time, which is a problem at the sheriff's office. It's not a problem manpower or anything else, just geography, and like you said, how large our parish is and the way it stretches out. So I do want to cut down on the response time, and I think rezoning the areas of patrol can possibly do that without having any effect on our budget.
Thank you, Mr. Dagg. Mr. Soley, question to you.
Yes. I plan on using all the resources available, local, state, and federal resources. When I was in narcotics, I had a good working relationship with DEA. Some of the FBI helped us on some of the cases. I also borrowed agents from local agencies such as Assumption Parish and St. Mary. I do plan on utilizing these resources as well to help fight the crime. I want to take the boats off land. Our water patrol boats, they sit on land. They serve no purpose at this point. I want to train these individuals that are in water patrol to, for what to look for and everything. So I will be using water patrol as an extension of the narcotics division. But most of all, I will be using local agencies as well as federal resources to be able to combat this problem.
Thank you, Mr. Soleg. Mr. Soigné, question to you.
Okay, we're surrounded by water in Terrebonne Parish. There's no question about that. Our boats are sitting. The sheriff's office boats are sitting. The issues we have, they are pretty pricey to operate, and I recognize that. But, here's a simple solution. I'm not the richest man in the world, but I got a 70 horsepower Yamaha on a 16-foot center console boat, and it costs me about $5 a day to go run around instead of $300 a day. So to put water patrol in our local waters, get them in tune with what's happening with the drugs, all of the stuff coming in, we need to put a little bit more presence out there. So one thing, a little bit lesser operating boats would be one answer for there, where we start cutting and tapping every single resource in Terrebonne Parish, tap every single state, local, and federal that's willing to help us out, so we conquering our borders in Terrebonne Parish and put more police officers out there. So we obviously have to go through looking at our finances, but actually prioritizing where one, a simple solution, a cheaper operating boat, and putting them on the water. And that would actually, I think, help as far as putting that presence out on the water, because like I said, our boats are not doing any good sitting there.
Thank you, Mr. Soigné. Mr. Bergeron, question to you.
We have a huge parish, and when you're politicking and you're going from one end to the other to put out signs, you realize how long it takes to get places. And a unique way to do things is a reserve deputy program. There's a lot of retired officers, there's a lot of firemen, there's people that would love to work in law enforcement, but they have a job and they have a pension, but they do have time. Once you get into law enforcement, I can promise you, you can't get out. And you can ask any of these officers here, it's hard to get out because you love the job. You have a passion for the job. There's a lot of people out there that would love to do that. So why don't we have a part-time academy to get them certified and then let them volunteer a certain amount of time to help us beef up our patrols and get more people out there, work with Water Patrol, and also working with the other agencies, Wildlife and Fisheries are out there. We can coordinate when everybody's out and when there's coverage of an area. In addition to this, you can look at what I was talking about earlier about, it's called predictive policing. And what it is, it's apps. It's a computer application looking at data of where crimes occur. So it doesn't make sense that I'm going to put 2 units sitting in Ellendale subdivision and they have had no crime. They have had nothing happen in a year. Why do I have somebody there? So it's allocating your people in the places where crimes historically have occurred, and this is a computer program. It's not very expensive, and it tells you this is a good chance that there's something going to happen in this area. That's where you allocate your funds. You reallocate your forces. Just put them in smart places where they need to be. In addition to having this reserve program and having the volunteers that are helping you beef up your patrols and get more coverage of your areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Ms. Smitko, question to you.
Again, goes back to what I said was the most important thing. Get the finances right. We have to look at every expense, every department, cut the expenses, work to increase the revenue. We can increase the revenue through contracts and grants. Once we do that, look at how many people we have sitting behind desks as opposed to how many men and women are out there on patrol. We need more people on patrol. If you talk to your kin folks, you'll find that if you're in Cocodrie and you call the police, it's going to take a long time for them to get there. Or if you're on Shrimpers Row, or perhaps Gibson, the response time is far too long. But we have to find the money to put more folks out there, or we need to get some folks from behind the desk or stop paying them so much to sit behind the desk so they can get out there and respond. In terms of the drugs coming in on boats, I think we can lean on Secretary Monasay and say, Jack, we need more enforcement agents from Wildlife and Fisheries down here on our waterways, because they'll complain about shortages as well. We can coordinate more with the Coast Guard, because if there are drugs coming in, they're passing that 7-mile limit out there. So I think once we get the finances in order, in terms of expenditures, evaluate the personnel, figure out how we can make more money, we're going to be able to achieve the objective, which is to put more police officers out there in the community.
Thank you, Ms. Smitko. Next question will begin with Mr. Soule.
Yes. There are ongoing discussions about revitalizing the downtown area of Houma. What do you consider to be the two most important things from a public safety standpoint that need to be addressed in that area, and how would you handle those?
I think safety is one of the main things that you need to look at. You need to be able to have the public feel confident that they'll be able to go in there without being accosted and victimized. What's the other part of your question?
It was the two most important things about public safety with respect to the downtown area revitalization, and then how would you handle those two items?
Well, being that the city handles that area, I'd be limited as far, but if they would need any help, I would be able to help them with that. And I'm kind of limited on that because, like I say, jurisdictional issues probably would play a part in this. If the police department would ask for help, I would help them.
Thank you, Mr. Soule. Mr. Saunier, question to you.
All right, first of all, because the sheriff's office shirt's a little light blue and HPD's a little darker, we're the same team. And any security issues within that community or within downtown, we got to be able to work together. The fact is our citizens of Terrebonne Parish went out there and joined events or whatever the case is going on down there, that we got to be able to provide safety. So we do have to work with HPD. We have to work with those areas, making sure that we can keep our community safe, especially when it comes to downtown and any types of events or anything else that goes on down there.
Thank you, Mr. Saunier. Mr. Bergeron, question to you.
Yes, as you said, the city police handle downtown area. That is their jurisdiction. However, I plan on working daily with the city police on issues as they occur. If you have an event going on, the sheriff's office needs to be involved with the city. But when I'm talking about working, I'm just not talking on a phone call. I'm talking about meeting with them daily. We're working with them hand in hand because the sheriff's office does cover the city too. And we need to be assisting each other. They can also reciprocate if we need help. But you have to have that relationship where it's not one organization against another and each one is in their own little bubble. We want to work both agencies together, not combining the agency. No way am I saying any of this, but to work together constantly on all the issues that are occurring as far as the crime in this parish.
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Ms. Smitko, question to you.
I think downtown Houma is pretty safe. I enjoy being down there. My office is down there. I come and go from my office at 3 and 4 in the morning. But I do think, and the other thing is that the sheriff is constitutionally the chief law enforcement officer of the parish. So it's best for the sheriff to respect the boundaries of the home police, but the sheriff can enforce the law in any part of the parish because that's constitutional. Couple things that would come to mind quickly: lighting, work with the parish government to increase lighting. If you want to make it more safe at night, increase the lighting. Second thing is work hard, generally what we're called Jude grants, to target underage drinking. I can't say public intoxication is a real safety issue, but if people know that they're not going to be able to get all tore up and walk the streets in downtown Houma, then I think that is that'll make it a safer place to be. It will certainly. We have a fair amount of assaults because of people in the barrooms downtown getting tore up, coming out and getting into fights. That's a crime. There are injuries committed. So in total, lighting, underage drinking, and public intoxication would make it, I believe, safer than it is. But it's a pretty safe and wonderful place.
Thank you, Ms. Smitko. Mr. Dagg, question to you.
Start by saying I love the downtown Houma area. From the daytime, I work in the courthouse now. I've spent probably close to half of my career in the courthouse versus outside of the courthouse. I like the events that occur on weekends and in the evenings, and the nightlife has come back in downtown Houma. I don't think it's a huge issue, but as far as how it would help with safety issues in the downtown areas, everyone else has pointed out that is within the city police's jurisdiction. Of course, the city is within Terrebonne Parish, and deputies can enforce laws within inside the city. I have a phenomenal working relationship with the city police department. I have had for several years and in every different capacity that I've worked in. I worked hand in hand with the patrol guys when I was a patrol supervisor. As a detective, some of the most interesting investigations I conducted was hand in hand with detectives from the city police department. And by all means, as the narcotics commander, I worked hand in hand with them on several major cases. I will continue to do just that. Like I said, I have a great working relationship with the city police department, from the administration, the chief himself, and on down through their detectives and narcotics agents. I will continue that relationship and do whatever we could to help out in the downtown Houma area.
Thank you, Mr. Degg. Mr. Soigny, the next question will begin with you.
This is to the candidates. Do you support advocating for the Louisiana Sheriff's Association to provide full retirement benefits to hazardous duty members that are totally and permanently disabled in the line of duty by an intentional act of violence?
You talking about a police officer on duty, right? Absolutely. Look, being a police officer is not an easy task. It's a task on the families. It's a task on all their loved ones. And if they get injured in the line of duty, absolutely I would support that. We have to support our police officers doing the job day in and day out. So, no doubt, we got to take care of our own.
Thank you, Mr. Soigny. Mr. Bergeron, question to you.
Yes, I also support that. Police officers, they put their life on their line. The deputies, the police officers, state police around here, they put their lives on the line continuously. And if something happens that could ruin their life, something happens, hurt in the line of duty, and they have no benefits. Just like going on workman's comp. You're making a certain amount of money and all of a sudden you're not getting anything or not enough to live on. We have to take care of the people that take care of us. So I'm in full support of that.
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Ms. Mitko, question to you.
Could you repeat the question, Mr. Hero?
Sure. Do you support advocating the Louisiana Sheriff's Association to provide for full retirement benefits to hazardous duty members that are totally and permanently disabled in the line of duty by an intentional act of violence?
Of course, that's a no-brainer. But let me take it a step further. Intentional act of violence, that's where we have a problem. If a deputy is on patrol and gets in a head-on collision with a drunk driver and they're totally and permanently disabled, they need it too. They need full retirement. So I'd take it a step further than you do. I wouldn't say just an intentional act of violence. If you're in the line of duty and something happens, not because you did something wrong, but if you're in the line of duty and you're permanently and totally disabled, then you need to be taken care of. That just goes without saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mitko. Mr. Degg, question to you.
My answer is simply yes, I would. So, and unfortunately, I learned this recently, and I'm sure some people know where this comes from, but I was unaware that they didn't until recent events that took place. So what some people don't know is that our retirement is through Louisiana Sheriff's Association, not through Terrebonne Parish Sheriff's Office. So as of right now, the sheriff does not depict what retirement you get. It goes through Louisiana Sheriff's Association, and there's their standard of the way that retirement would happen. So as of right now, if you get injured in the line of duty and you work for any sheriff's office in the state, you get your retirement, and you get it based on the amount of years of service that you have. So depending on how far you are into your career depends on how much you will draw from that. If you're permanently disabled with only a couple of years, that is very minimal. And I disagree with it. Louisiana Sheriff's Association is the most lucrative retirement system in the state. Now, of course, they are, because they have managed that money well and they've taken care of things, okay? But I do believe that if you're going to loosen the reins on anything, that's where you loosen the reins. On a deputy that puts his life on the line every day to protect and serve, that gets injured as a result of that, whether it is, like Ms. Smitko said, by a head-on collision by a drunk driver, to the guy that gets shot in the line of duty. He put his life on the line to protect all of us. We should be able to take care of him. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Degg. Mr. Soule, question to you.
I say absolutely yes to that question. I will do everything in my power to push for that act to go through and make sure that these officers are taken care of.
Thank you, Mr. Soule. Next question will begin with Mr. Bergeron.
Mr. Bergeron, how do you plan to incentivize participation in hazardous duty assignments such as SWAT or narcotics enforcement? And how do you plan to incentivize participation in higher education opportunities such as degree programs and foreign language programs?
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think it's hard to find anybody that wants to get in the SWAT. They love it. They want to get there. I don't know if you really need an incentive, because everybody that does any tactical teams, they have volunteered for it. I see a few people here that volunteered for it, and they love it. You don't really have to say, hey, do you want to? I need you to do this. No, these are, as Tim said, type A personalities. They love action. They want to do these things. So what was your other question?
This is a long question. The next part is how do you plan on incentivizing higher education and having them develop interest in establishing foreign languages and everything to deal with a current?
Yes. Well, one of the things the federal government does is you may get an extra pay for foreign language capabilities like Spanish. And they have to take tests and they have to have certain proficiencies, but they get extra pay. And that's one way to recruit people with Spanish capabilities, which is predominantly what's needed in this area, or an Asian language. Vietnamese also is very helpful down here, but every once in a while, I was called as head of Homeland Security down here for translations into Arabic. Now, we do have lines that we could call in and put people on the phones and do the translations, and I had people that had those language capabilities. So an additional pay is something that you can help recruit people with. I'm not sure. And the higher education, working with Nichols and Fletcher in the criminal justice programs to come up with incentives. It might be a monetary incentive. If you have an associate degree, you have a little bit more to your pay. If you have a bachelor's degree, also a little bit more to the pay, your monthly pay, as incentives. Also working with them to come up with a program to help our deputies.
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron.
Go into the program.
Time is up. Question to Ms. Smitko.
I'm going to have to hurry with this, and it's a good question. We need to promote diversity within the Sheriff's Department. There's no doubt about that. If you're asking a deputy to go in an area where it's predominantly Spanish-speaking to solve a crime, and all he hears is no habla anglais, or he's not going to get very far. Vietnamese, a small percentage, but it'd be great. We need to promote diversity within the department, but and you don't have to worry about SWAT and narcotics, because those are the, let me say this gently, those are the hormone jobs. A lot of guys want those jobs. They're itching to get them so they can do the oorah, okay? So you don't have to worry about that part. But if we talk about the way I would like to have the department run with procedural justice, you're going to be looking at performance, education, training, critical thinking skills for promotion. So if we cut a deal with Dr. Strickland and we set up programs that are teaching in the criminal justice department the new, innovative, empirically proven ways of law enforcement, and we set it up so people can go whether on A shift or B shift, and they know that once I earn that associate's degree, I have checked off that part of the matrix for promotion We don't have to incentivize them because they're going to be doing it. They're going to be doing the Department of Service by learning, and they're going to be doing themselves a service by furthering their education. But we need to work on getting grants, tuition breaks, which I'm sure we can
Thank you, Ms.
get.
Mitko. That is all of
Thank
your
you.
time. Mr. Dagg, question to you.
So as a little over 22 years member of the SWAT team and a narcotics agent, we'll take that as a compliment. I hope that's how it was meant. But she's 100% correct. Incentives for tactical team members and for narcotics I've never seen as being a necessity. The types that push forward for these jobs want them. They want to do the work and be there. They want to be the first guy in the door. They want to be part of that. So incentives, how do you say that the SWAT team is more important than, or the narcotics division is more important than any other division? So I don't think that they need incentives as far as supplemental pay towards other divisions or anything like that. The sheriff's office is one big team, and every different division and every different part of it brings something different to the team. Okay, you don't expect the detective to go out and formulate a plan for the undercover work or the confidential informant work of the narcotics division. And you don't take the narcotics agent and expect that you can throw him in a boat and he can navigate through every part of the waterways of Terrebonne Parish. So although you may not classify it as we specialize in different divisions, we're all separate parts of the team. We all bring something to the table. And I don't think you need those incentives for SWAT. As far as the foreign language goes, this is becoming more of an issue in Terrebonne Parish. I would think Spanish is the largest second language that we're struggling with. We do have some Spanish-speaking employees that we use as translators at times. But I do believe that we do need some more diversity in that. And we do need to focus on that as far as getting into the other communities and being able to speak their language, communicate for the betterment of our investigations.
Thank you, Mr. Dagg. Mr. Soule, question to you.
I had never seen an incentive as far as SWAT. I just wanted to dress out like everybody else. But as far as that's concerned, SWAT is a dangerous situation that you always get into, but the incentive is just wanting to be able to make that difference and help somebody on the other side of that door. As far as foreign language, there are law enforcement training facilities that provide foreign language training, and they're grant funded and everything. So I plan on using those as well, and also get with the local colleges and try to get something going with them as well. As far as educational incentives, I'd like to get with these local colleges and see about getting programs together to where the deputies could come out with associate's degrees and stuff like that, and also in the long term, just financially help them out.
Thank you, Mr. Soule. Mr. Soignier, question to you.
Well, I was a SWAT commander from 2012 to 2019, so I guess my hormones were a little elevated, I guess. But most important thing, these guys are SWAT. I've never, ever seen anything about incentive, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Most of the time when we had tryouts, we had them lining up out of the door that wants to be something much bigger than themselves. But that's more importantly just about every police officer. They do want to serve a cause higher than themselves. So when you have something more of an elite nature, such as SWAT or anything like that, of course they want to be part of that. Incentive, I guess if we had issues to where we couldn't get enough volunteers, I would consider stipends, a reasonable amount of stipends. We actually do that for K-9. K-9 is another operation, but they actually get a stipend for being a K-9 because, one, they've got to take it home. They have to feed the dog. They have to take care of that dog. That dog's part of their life 24/7. So having a stipend with K-9 was always a good incentive, but again, most of those guys did it because they just want to be something part bigger. Now, as far as education, no doubt. Spanish speaking, there are schools, there are organizations and grant funded schools that actually provide training for law enforcement. They recognize the need. I learned at an early age as a police officer I went on a complaint for domestic violence, and the only thing they knew was Spanish. And when I called 911, there was a resource on 911, had a translator. So really, I was talking to the victim, I was handing the victim the phone, and they handed it back to me, so I can ask questions and go back and forth. So further in education, without rewarding your people to further educate themselves, you'd be a fool. You have to promote educating your people. Somebody once said, if you don't invest in your people, and they said, if you do invest in your people and they leave, what happens if you don't invest in them and they stay?
Mrs. Wanya, your time is up. Thank you. Candidates, it's now 7:34. In order to give you adequate time for your closing comments, because I know we all want to hear closing comments, this will probably be our last question of the evening. And that question will begin with Ms. Mitko.
Okay. The question is, what is your experience with hurricane preparedness and storm recovery efforts?
Well, I can tell you, after Katrina Rita, I would go to the Civic Center, pick up stuff, put it in the truck, put the pirogue in the truck, and covered so many miles down the bayou, delivering stuff to people, would bring the trailer behind the truck and then load it to the pirogue and go out. That's my experience. Went to the shelters. At some point, I had, I think it was 26 people that I didn't know living in my house, feeding them every day. Some of them stayed. There was a lady from Lakeview and a guy named Luck, a Vietnamese man who weathered it out on his boat. They stayed at my house for over 2 months before they found somewhere to go. But it was okay. That's my experience. The important thing is we have TOSEP, I call it, might be pronouncing it wrong. We have GOSEP, then we have FEMA. It's structured on a parish level, a state level, and a federal level. I can say, and I had a case against him one time, I don't think he cares for me very much, but Mr. Earl Hughes, I read the plan, the parish plan. The parish has a plan. It delegates everybody's authority, it has an organizational chart, and it lays it out. This is what everyone does. So it's a great plan through Gordy and then Mr. Hughes, the director of our office of Terrebonne Parish Office of Emergency Preparedness. It's a great plan. All the sheriff's office do, and every other agency that's involved, because everybody's involved, we have to make sure we can execute on that plan. So it's local, then coordination with the
Thank you,
state
Ms.
level,
Mitko.
GOSEP,
I'm
and
sorry,
federal.
time is up. Mr. Day, question to you. Mr. Day, question to you.
I believe the question was, what was my experience, correct? All right, so for 23 years, I've been involved in every storm that has affected our coast or even threatened the coast of Terrebonne Parish. I have a lot of different experiences working these storms as different levels of the sheriff's office, from the preparation part of it and planning and getting ready for the storm and what the sheriff's office can do to include evacuating people. I've been on the streets helping people sandbag and every other part of preparation to it, to the storm part itself, from being in a boat when no one should be in a boat, rescuing someone else that shouldn't have been in their boat. And the recovery part of it. I've been involved in all aspects of it. There's a lot of work to do afterwards. I've been assigned to the Sheriff's Office 5-ton division for some of our storms, where we evacuated beforehand and we brought relief efforts and supplies down the bayou after. I've been anywhere from on a four-wheeler going through flooded waters to being in a boat helping people. I've been on the levees, checking to see what they were doing and how they were doing. I've worked it from the bottom level of the sheriff's office to the top. No one likes to see a storm, and neither do I. We had this recent storm that came, and I experienced it on a administrator level and working hand in hand with our OEP department and other divisions of parish, state, and government to make things happen. 23 years for every storm that's come. I've never ridden a storm out behind a desk, and I won't ever ride one out behind a desk. I've never evacuated Terrebonne Parish and left, and I never will evacuate Terrebonne Parish and leave it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Degg. Mr. Soule, question to you.
38 years of hurricanes that impacted Terrebonne Parish. I was there, boots in the water. I was there from the planning, rescue, and recovery. Also, I worked with, we went to New Orleans on the rescue team to evacuate Touro Hospital, and then we found a nursing home that the staff had abandoned their patients there. We evacuated them. So my experience with hurricanes and everything, it's like we didn't have the technology when I first started that we do now, and we didn't have Terrebonne Homeland Security that we do now when I first started. So I will use all those resources to aid in the planning and the recovery part of the storm. But yes, I have the experience, and I'm able to help the parish recover as well as evacuate when needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Soule. Mr. Saulnier, question to you.
Well, I rode a lot of 5 tons during the storm. Crossed Island Road looked like it was a lake. But more importantly, and understand is when we have to evacuate and being prepared for actually what's to take place. When people evacuate, we assist in evacuation. Oftentimes, people don't evacuate, and we end up going out there and try to help save them as well. But more importantly is understanding. From one, we do have to work with outside entities, and being out there in the earlier stages of storm and identifying the resources that's needed, working with Homeland Security, working with all our other government entities that we can get the proper resources to get our community back in order. That's going from clearing roadways to identifying the needs, identifying what we're going to need to actually bring our community back, because we have to bring the revenue, we have to bring business back in there as quick as possible, because when people start coming back, and if we're not prepared for that, who's going to feed them? I mean, quite frankly, if the stores are not open, if we're not prepared to have the stores open, who's going to feed them when the people start coming back? Their food's most of the time spoiled. A lot of these things are happening. So we have to in-stage and work with all our entities where we can actually bring things back. And that's something we have to continue to do and work together.
Thank you, Mr. Saulnier. Mr. Bergeron, question to you.
My experience in hurricanes goes straight to Hurricane Katrina. At the time, special agents with the United States government were not first responders to a disaster. I went to Baton Rouge within 2 days of Katrina landfall when we saw what was happening on TV, and we had no contact with our management. From there, I ended up being the point man for Homeland Security, dealing with our Memphis office, who was relaying information on how to get in the city, how are we going to meet with the mayor. The special agent in charge in New Orleans was in Washington at the time and was sent down by Secretary Chertoff to meet with the mayor. I picked him up with a tactical team. We went in and we found out that the city of New Orleans, their command and control structure had collapsed. We couldn't find the mayor initially. And when you're not prepared for something and when you see what anarchy occurs, it's enlightening. They didn't have any plan. They left. A lot of the police left. So we had to come up with the plan for the federal law enforcement response, working with state police on how we were going to restore order again in the city of New Orleans. And I was in all the planning, and I didn't do it all because there was a lot of stuff we had to learn. Logistics, getting support, getting agents in. We put 400 agents into the city, and we built a mini city inside the city. You probably didn't see it on TV. Our boss was adamant about not taking the publicity and saying anything that would detract from the city of New Orleans. They were gone. We handled the recovery and the law enforcement response during Katrina. As a result of that, I was one of the founding members of the Rapid Response Team, which is now in every major SAC office in the country, and they respond to incidents that occur like this. Came down for Gustav. You do have a great Terrebonne Office of Homeland Security Emergency Preparedness has a great plan, and I know the sheriff's office works as a uniform.
We will now move on to giving each candidate 3 minutes for closing comments to discuss anything you would like to discuss. We will begin with Ms. Smitko and work our way down. Ms. Smitko, the floor is yours for 3 minutes.
I talked a little bit earlier about perception versus reality. Sometimes we watch TV and our perception is something that this is a horrible problem, but that's not reality. And sitting here tonight, you may have the perception that we have a horrible crime problem in Terrebonne Parish. The reality is we live in a wonderful place, and crime is not nearly as bad as it is in other places. We have problems with drugs, there's no doubt about it, but we have to try a new approach to dealing with that. We have to change our mindset when it comes to policing, and this is going to be one of the hardest things to do, because the old mindset has been proven not to work. We have to get rid of the warrior mindset, the warriors. And we have to move our department into a guardian mindset. And that's a big cultural shift, because the sheriff's department, the entire department, from the deputies to the commanders, are there as guardians of the peace to prevent crime and to enforce the law. But in this whole debate, we can't lose sight of the fact that there's so much more to the sheriff's department. The sheriff's department has to put into effect policies that will make sure that if someone's home goes up for foreclosure, it's going to be sold at the maximum price, so they're not facing a big default judgment. The sheriff's office has to make sure that your tax notice, or the tax notice to your 82-year-old aunt, really gets to her so she doesn't lose her home in 3 years. The sheriff's department has to make sure that the courtroom is secure. The sheriff's office, the sheriff, has to make sure that people in the jails are treated appropriately, because otherwise you end up with masses of litigation for constitutional violations, and every time the sheriff's office does something wrong and gets sued, it gets paid. The money's coming from somewhere. The sheriff's office, as I said, most important thing, has to get the financial house in order. Doing that, using best practices, changing from the way of the old that's been done forever to the best practices out there. We will move forward. We will have
Thank you, Ms. Mitko.
transparency.
Your 3 minutes are up.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Dagg, 3 minutes begins now.
In closing, once again, thank the chamber for putting this on, everyone else that helped. I thank the people in the crowd who came and thought it was important enough to hear us and what we had to say before you make your judgment. I appreciate everyone. As I stated during my opening, I have a very diverse career within the sheriff's office. I'm now the chief deputy, where I supervise every division of the sheriff's office underneath the sheriff, run the day-to-day operations. I was given that chance and that title because I have worked in every division of the sheriff's office. I know every division of the sheriff's office. You know, there may be multiple issues that Terrebonne Parish faces, but as Ms. Mitko said, we live in a great place and a safe place. I love this community. I love our parish. I love it from downtown Houma to the cypress swamp and saltwater marshes. This is where I was born, this is where I was raised, and this is where I choose to stay. Being a public servant at heart, I want to help everyone else that wants to raise their family here. So there may be coalitions that you can get behind as a sheriff, and you can do other things that would help the community, as I said earlier. And I would be all about doing those things to help the community. But don't lose sight of the fact that the sheriff is the supreme law enforcement officer in the parish, and his job is to solve crime, prevent crime. We're here to protect and serve. I've been there, I've done that. I don't care if it's shutting down major new narcotics pipelines that are trying to come into Terrebonne Parish, or if it's standing on the levee when the storm's pounding. The relief efforts are important, but being out there when the tree is coming through your roof and trying to offer you the evacuation is the most important part of it, okay? I have tiptoed through the crime scenes. I have walked around the shell casings to process the crime scene. I've been from crime scene through conviction on almost every crime that can occur in Terrebonne Parish, as I said earlier, from theft to homicide. I know the ins and outs of it, and I know the testimony part of it. That's what I bring to the table. My experience, true life experience. One thing I've heard through this campaign is people saying to me, man, we have a lot of experience running for sheriff. I agree, we have a lot of experience running for sheriff. We have a lot of different experiences, life experiences running for sheriff. It's your choice on who you think is the most qualified and what kind of experience you want. I have the in-house experience to investigate crimes, to get them prosecuted the correct way. And I believe that that is the most important part of the sheriff's office. Like I said, whether it be narcotics investigations, a big part of it is the storms, through to the detective level work. I've been there, I've done that, and I can train the younger ones to do it as well.
Thank you, Mr. Dagg. Your time is up. Mr. Soule, your 3 minutes.
I don't have the gift of gab to be a politician, but I have what it takes to be your sheriff. 38 years I've devoted my life to the Terrebonne Parish, and this is what I love to do. Blue runs in my body. That is my blood. I love this parish. I love the resilience of the people in this parish, and I decided a long time ago that this is where I want to finish my career. I also want to be your sheriff. I've worked major crimes. I've worked narcotics 13 years. So I want to be the sheriff, and geez, I lost my thought. Anyway, October 12th, I ask for your vote. Thank you. Jeez.
Thank you, Mr. Soule. Mr. Soigné, 3 minutes to you.
Well, first of all, I love my country and I love the people of Terrebonne Parish. That's one thing. I've served my country 35 years. 35 years from my military experience onto law enforcement experience. But when we're looking at the drugs, the crimes, everything we're talking about in our community, one thing as a sheriff, you know, it's a label sheriff, but it should be more of the ambassador. Because if we don't tap into the community, we don't work together on accomplishing all of these problems we have as issues, we can't do it alone. We rely on the people. So the more important thing is we have all these people up here, and I commend every one of them for sitting up here. But on October 12th, you got to make a decision who you want to hire. Who do you want to hire to do the job, and who do you think is going to do it the best that they can to serve the people of the parish? The office does belong to the people of Terrebonne Parish. It is a sheriff's office, but it does belong to the people. And you have to decide who you want to hire. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Soigné. Mr. Bergeron, 3 minutes to you.
Mark Twain once said, the two most important days of a person's life is when they're born and when they find out why. I found out why when I became a sheriff's deputy. I loved it. I love this parish, or I would be living somewhere else. I came back home. That was my main goal, is to get back home, because there's no place like the good earth. No place like home. And I'm going to tell you this, when we ran, I was working at Loop, Louisiana Offshore Port, and again, I'm just going to repeat that. It's the #1 critical infrastructure site, and I ran security, and I left voluntarily. I didn't have to. They encouraged me. They wanted me to stay on while running for sheriff. I told them I was going to run for sheriff, and I left a lucrative position with another retirement. Within 10 more months, I'd have had another retirement from them. I left it because I have a passion to serve the people of Terrebonne Parish. It's what I love. It's what I do. You have a big decision to make, a very big decision. They have some great candidates up here. I know them all. Every one of them I worked with at one point. They're great people. They're good people. I'm the only outsider other than Ms. Smitko. My experience is the federal government. I did start as a deputy. That's where I got my basics in law enforcement. But my training, everything I can bring to the table, and my networking is from the federal government. And I hope on October 12th, I ask for your vote. Blaine Bergeron, number 86. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Candidates, thank you for participating in the forum tonight. I think it was an excellent forum. Panelists, thank you for volunteering. Thank the Chamber staff and the Board of Directors for their participation in the forum. Special thanks to Dr. Strickland and her staff for allowing us to use the beautiful facility and setup. The Houma Terrebonne Chamber of Commerce would like to thank everyone for attending this forum.